we dive into this exciting topic, I would like to introduce our moderator for today. So Richard Clayman, I had the pleasure to work many times with Richard in the past with the MBA conference. So I was really delighted when he accepted our invitation to be the moderator for today. So Richard is a seasonal professor at the Telfer School of Management, where he teaches courses in leadership and team development. Richard brings a wealth of private sector experience to his executive and residence and graduate school teaching role. Following early years served in the Canadian Armed Forces, Richard built a 30 years award-winning career in the financial sectors with Manulife Financial. As regional vice president, he was responsible for a multi-billion dollar distribution and service operation in partnership with over 1,000 financial intermediaries across 6 provinces. In addition to his corporate experience, Richard has served on various boards and councils, and is well known for his energetic and student-centered teaching style, which has earned him consistently outstanding student evaluation and several prestigious teaching awards. So without further ado, I would like to introduce, I would like to turn it over to Professor Clayman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Welcome to everybody. Bienvenue à tous. Thank you to our speakers who I'll be introducing in a moment, and all of you who have signed on or who will be watching this as a recording later on. The metaverse, it's become a hot topic, even though we don't know sometimes what exactly we want to say about it. According to Citibank, the metaverse represents anywhere between $8 and $13 trillion of opportunity only by the year 2030, much more after that. It could boast soon 5 billion users. So what's all the hype? What is the metaverse, and why should we care? How is it going to affect us? These don't seem to be a clear consensus on a definition. Mark Zuckerberg, for one, describes it as the successor to the mobile internet. And if we can remember back to the way life has changed because of the internet, we're in for another ride. As an immersive internet, whether you're in the experience and not just looking at it is going to be quite something to learn. As with any innovation or invention, though, the metaverse will likely influence all aspects of our lives, and certainly in terms of business and how we promote that and careers into the future. There'll be great opportunities for organizations in the metaverse. We're going to find out a little bit more about what it is, what those opportunities are, and perhaps how we can leverage, and maybe even how we can look out and prepare ourselves better. Today, running from when we turn it over to our panel to approximately 1 o'clock, we'll have a panel discussion. From 1 to 1:15, if there are questions, we're happy to have our speakers respond to that. And we plan to end this exactly at 1:15. So without further ado, let me just take a moment to introduce our 2 speakers. Tara David is a Web3 strategy and generative IA program lead for Deloitte. She's a skilled manager in Deloitte's Omnia AI practice, specializing in AI and data. Her expertise as the Web3 lead for Canada allows her to create data-driven strategies for clients that harness the full potential of Web3. With a diverse range of clients from various industries, Tara's gained valuable experience in advising them on the strategic implications of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and decentralized technology, all things I barely understand. She holds a bachelor's degree in commerce from the Telfer School of Management. Tara, welcome and thank you for being here. Our second speaker will be, or our second panelist, is Justine Hendricks, President and CEO of Farm Credit Canada. Before joining FCC, she served as the Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer and Senior Vice President of Sales and Business Enablement at Export Development Canada, EDC. At EDC, she was previously served as Vice President of Working Capital Solutions, Guarantee and Bonding Programs at Export Canada. And before joining EDC, Justine held a Senior Branch Manager position at RBC Financial Group for more than 10 years. She's a graduate of the University of Ottawa's MBA program and also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from Carleton. She has a Certified Financial Planner designation and is a recipient of the Trudeau Medal from the Telfer School of Management, recognizing her leadership, initiative, and contributions to the business world and the community. From 2014 to 19, she also served as chair of the Forum of Young Canadians, a foundation that provides young people with direct access to the minds, procedures, and energy of Parliament Hill. Welcome, Justine. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Richard.
So right into the panel discussion, let's start. Tara, help us to understand. Metaverse is a word that people are tossing around. What's your definition or interpretation of the metaverse? And what's the potential developments coming in the upcoming years? Help us get a picture of that, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. First of all, just want to say very grateful to be here. And I do want to just start off by saying I am in Mexico vacationing. My internet's a bit spotty, so if I turn my camera off at any point, it's because the connection is not great. But like you said earlier, Richard, there is no unified definition of what is the metaverse. The way that I like to think about it in the most simplest form is it's an evolution of the internet that's very much focused on that immersive experience element. So if we look back to the internet, we started off and it was primarily text-based. We then moved into a focus on pictures. And now we've moved into an era where we have these short TikTok style videos. Now, the next evolution of that is really focused on the experiences. And to provide an example, today a lot of folks use the internet to learn. So let's say, for example, you're a student trying to become a doctor. You might go online and you might research the anatomy of the human body, and you read about these different elements to learn about it. In the future, and I've actually already gone through and experienced this through a demo, is there's experiences today where you can actually take apart the human body. So there's an example of a body. I see this through virtual reality, so it feels very real, and I'm able to take out the heart and examine it. I'm able to dive into the, blood circulation of the entire body. So it's similar today where I can go and learn about the human body, but instead of reading about it, I can do so in a hands-on experience. That's just one example. Another one is collaboration. Right now, you and I are looking at each other through a 2D screen, and we're able to speak through the internet. Through the metaverse, you and I can actually meet in a 3D virtual world. And let's say, Richard, you and I wanted to have a side conversation. We could actually step away. We can have that conversation as we walk away, we hear a little bit less the people around us. So we're not forced to go into a breakout room, right? So it's exactly the internet today. We're able to do what we can do today, but it's the experience that it's at the very center of it. In terms of future development, today we have a lot of siloed experiences. So there's, different virtual worlds that we can go and interact in. There's different experiences we can go through, but they're all very siloed, where in the future, I see these coming more together. So in one instance, I might teleport into a world where you and I can discuss a, business meeting, but from there, I'll teleport to a mall where I might go shop with my friends. So it'll feel a lot more natural versus today, there's all these like little experiences that you can go to. None of them are connected. So I think we're very much in the early days of the metaverse, but essentially it's an internet where the experiences are at the forefront and they're a lot more immersive than the internet that we're used to today.
Well, thank you. And so one of the examples you just gave was healthcare in terms of the anatomy of the body and really an immersive feeling, just like we've seen sometimes art shows have been put on where you're immersed by the pictures all surrounding you. Any other applications, promising applications that come to mind, let's say in education or finance? Any examples that you might let us take a peek on early on?
Yeah, I would say education is definitely a big one. I think about the metaverse, one of the use cases, regardless of the industry, is that learning element. So when I think about education, the metaverse offers a lot of opportunity, but where I see the most opportunity is those areas where we need to learn skills that maybe are not that safe. Like, let's say there's jobs where you have a lot of hands-on labor, and if you were to make a mistake, you could get hurt or someone else can get hurt. The metaverse offers this safe space for you to learn without putting anyone at risk, right? So education as a whole, I think a lot of them can benefit from the metaverse, but where I see the most value is some of those more high-risk occupations. For example, learning to become someone that flies planes, right? Like being a pilot. How do you actually practice that today? How can you practice those skills in terms of how do I navigate this plane in a hurricane? You can't practice that today. It's more so you can try to practice it and learn about it, but when it comes down to the actual situation, it might be your first time. So I think education as a whole, yes, you can benefit from the metaverse, but it's more so the hands-on skills where I think you get the most value, or the skills where you can't really practice them today. And that goes to flying a plane, that goes to security, that goes to military. A lot of those high risk jobs now have an opportunity to be able to practice this. And in terms of like global adoption, a lot of countries, I'm seeing this element of learning and education in the metaverse being applied to military, security, and more of those high risk type of jobs.
So could it be said that the first iteration, a very simple iteration of the metaverse was airplane, air pilot simulators, which only allowed you to kind of to take off and fly, but didn't allow you to be in the middle of a hurricane or a windstorm or something like that. This is much more immersive, much more real.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll add, Richard, is I really emphasized here the hands-on learning and education. But another example I've seen in the US, which is more focused on soft skills development, is actually in the US, one of the states was using learning in the metaverse to be able to train social workers to have some of those more challenging conversations. So hands-on learning is definitely, a high opportunity area, but it's also the soft skills. So you're able to have those tough conversations again in this safe place before actually going to, implement that in the real world. But yes, I would say first iteration, those are the areas that I'm seeing the most adoption in the metaverse.
So if the hallmark of the metaverse is immersion, I'm thinking of companies and how they market and how they push their brands and how we interact with it. So do you see a way where people are going to be reacting or interacting with corporate brands in a different way?
Absolutely. So I would say that's something I've already seen. I'll give you an example. So there's Prada. So Prada has a bunch of these immersive experiences where they showcase their, products to customers. But one of the very interesting experiences that I went through is you actually had these models take you through tours of different cities, and their outfits actually matched the vibe of that city. So in New York, you had these very chic outfits. In Milan, you had different ones, but that whole experience, it is a virtual reality enabled experience. But essentially, I had this model. It felt like they would come and grab my hand and take me through a tour of this city. So I definitely see it changing the way that we interact with customers, the way that we position and market our brands. And it's very much centered around your product. So yeah, definitely see an opportunity there. And it's also a great way where, I'm seeing a lot of organizations are now shifting to building communities around their products. It's not just like, hey, I'm selling you this vacuum, I'm selling you this outfit, but I'm taking you through this experience that helps you see, what this product is, but then also building communities around it. And I think experiences is really key to being able to position your product in that way and to build those different experiences and communities.
That's an absolutely fascinating frontier. I want to bring Justine in now as well. Justine, what role do you see artificial intelligence playing in the metaverse?
Oh, well, so that's a great question, Richard. And maybe first I'll just warn the audience that Tara's lucky she's in Mexico. I am at the airport. So if by any chance there's an announcement, I'll apologize for that. I think, Richard, in terms of the more we experience with the metaverse, right, in different forms, such as some of the examples that Tara has given, AI can play a role in that. It'll keep on learning and improving that experience. So I think the ability to continuously be on a path where we're developing and fine tuning what those experiences to be so that they can be as real as possible. And I'm certainly looking at it from a learning perspective, right? If I can, through the metaverse, access the latest and greatest information and be able to experience it myself, regardless of, where I am, my age or level of education, and I can actually keep on learning wherever I am. I think that's a huge benefit. Now, having said that, I'd be remiss if I didn't also add that what comes with that ability to continuously learn and see how artificial intelligence can help, it also has to be governed, right? Because the more learning there is and the more data made available to then be transposed into an experience, there's a lot elements in terms of what is required to go in that to protect people's privacy and also some of the knowledge capabilities that might be there that we just want to make sure we govern accordingly.
Very interesting. Tara, what about you? Artificial intelligence playing a major factor in the metaverse. How do you see that?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying my specialty in AI is generative AI. So for folks that have heard about ChatGPT and some of those models, so the best way for me to answer this, I'm going to give you an example. So let's say Telfer creates, the Telfer School of Management within the metaverse. So the metaverse experience there is you can go, you can learn from folks, you can collaborate, etc. And the role that generative AI would play there, a few areas potentially. So one is the actual professor. So we think not, maybe it's the professor's assistant, but essentially you can see a world where generative AI is actually there and being able to be that source of information for students. And the cool thing about generative AI is it's been trained on pretty much the entire internet. So you can see a world where you have this teacher that's being customized to the actual learner. So if I'm Tara and I have very strong skills in presentations and data and analytics, but I'm not so good at, maybe math and other things, so that AI model can essentially be very custom to what I need to learn in my skills. The next thing is generative AI is able to create 3D models. So for example, if I go to ChatGPT today and I say, hey, write me a position of what is the metaverse and why it's great for society. The same type of AI models can be used to create 3D models. So I can say, hey, create me, 4 chairs that I can put for a panel, create me, a desktop, etc. So you can actually use AI to be able to play that role of that virtual assistant or professor, but then also to create the actual 3D items that we want in the world. And this is huge for the metaverse, because one of the things that I found, focusing on the metaverse for the last couple of years is mass adoption is not here. And a lot of that is due to the barriers of creating these experiences. You need specialized skills. It's expensive. It's challenging. It's a bit of a newer skill set. So generative AI, in my mind, can play a role in reducing some of those barriers to entries and really enhancing these experiences in these worlds that we'd look to create in the metaverse.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, if we look at this as another wave of an industrial revolution, a technical revolution, when we go back to the industrial revolution, at the end and turn of the centuries, everyone started lamenting, oh, it's going to take jobs away. But in every event, it actually created brand new jobs that we hadn't really seen. So I'd like to ask both Justine first and then Tara, how can companies start to prepare for the emergence of the metaverse and ensure that they're well positioned to take advantage, or even make their people aware and more open to the fact that we have a period of adjustment to make? Justine, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, great question, Richard. So as you're asking your question, this is what comes to mind for me. I think in terms of any business, and your question earlier about AI, I think is a bit similar in the sense of, I think as a business, you have to say first at the strategic level, what role is the metaverse going to play, right? Just like what role do we see AI playing in our business? So
Yep.
I could take where I am as a leader, right? And I think if you don't start at the strategic level first, then it becomes kind of a sporadic, right? In terms of areas of the business that may or may not use it because they're maybe more exposed to it or see more of the opportunity. And that's where I think sometimes we don't do the best in terms of really maximizing what the potential is. But I also think it comes along with the ability to govern it accordingly, right? So somebody's side project that decides to go off without having maybe the full awareness, I think that, right, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So to me, it's kind of, you start at the strategic level based on where you are today. All of us are kind of looking into the future. How are we going to continue to remain relevant to our customers? And does that metaverse technology opportunity play a role in that? And once you've answered that strategically, I think that should guide you to say, what do I need to do to prepare? Off the top of my head, I think of, well, you need to better understand it for yourself, right? Bring in what's going to be the governance that you're going to do internally. And then really, I would say even is to understand what your customer base is to see what would be the best application over time. That's what I would probably kick us off with on that question.
Yeah, no, very, very good. Tara, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
How do we
completely
get prepared?
So completely agree with Justine around bringing that strategic lens and not just innovating for the purpose of innovating, but innovating with purpose and having those guardrails around it. I would say once you have kind of that strategic view, the way that I think about the metaverse and the conversations I've had with my clients is there's a lot of internal use cases. So for example, how do I enhance learning? How do I, enhance collaboration? How do I simulate things before I build it in the physical world? And then there's the external use cases of how do I, bring this to customers? How do I use this to enhance loyalty, engagement, et cetera? And with the metaverse, where we're at with the state of adoption, I typically will tell clients to consider starting in-house. Consider your learning capabilities, your collaboration, your simulation capabilities before you go externally. And that provides a few benefits. For one, you can now learn about it before you go to market. Secondly, if I think about the metaverse, it's all about this immersive internet. And that spectrum of immersiveness, it's a spectrum. It's not just it's immersive and it's not immersive. So it can be immersive by me having a 3D world that I can just walk around. And that goes a lot more further by having virtual reality, augmented reality, even getting to wearables, right? So if you, and folks, have many different perspectives, but for me personally, as you get to more immersiveness, the cooler the experience is, the more impactful it is. But today, many people do not have these devices that enable that more immersive experience. So if you go straight to externally and you go to those external use cases, a lot of the customers are not going to have those devices. There's a lot of barriers to entry there. So if you start internally with the learning use case, the collaboration, the simulations, you have more control as an enterprise. You can ensure that your employees have those devices with them so they can actually experience it to that full extent. So I would say as companies start thinking about what is my role, how do I play, how do I win, I think starting internally to learn about it first, figure out what works, what doesn't, and then in the future as adoption grows, then it's okay, now how do I use this externally with my customer base?
Yeah, it takes prototyping to a whole new level, right? And it's a learning curve that we're all going to have to take. But you mentioned one thing, you mentioned the word guardrails. So I want to come back to that for a second, because there's got to be some challenges that we're anticipating already in terms of privacy, security. If we're very immersed in something, that immersion is data in and of itself. So data ownership in the metaverse, how can we start to address the issue of privacy, security, and who owns the data, who owns our immersion?
Yeah, happy to kick that off. So I would say that when we think about data, when we think about ownership, we live in a world today where we access a lot of free services and applications, and, we're giving our data in exchange. There is no right answer right now or one answer in the metaverse because it depends on the platform, right? So if I'm using Meta's metaverse experiences, that data is all with Meta, or formerly known as Facebook. So it comes down to the way that we design these metaverse experiences. We have centralized worlds which are owned and operated by a single company such as Meta, and then we have some of these decentralized worlds that are starting to spin up. Adoption is super low, nothing compared to metaverse, but essentially these are the worlds that are built using blockchain technology, where users can actually own the assets that they create in these worlds, and ideally in the future their data would stay with them as well. But the adoption is just so different. If I think about Meta to these decentralized worlds, like the adoption is super low, but I would say it all depends on the platform and how it's been built. And I hope that in the future, we will have these metaverse worlds that have some sort of digital identity. So myself, Tara, as a user, as I go through these worlds, the data stays with me, but we're not there yet. But it is a big risk. Like if I think about just wearing a virtual reality headset, that tracks my eye movements, that tracks my actual room, because you need to actually, have that view so that you're able to create, your space so you don't run into a wall. So there's a ton of data that is being generated in these worlds, and that's only going to increase. So I definitely think digital identity is a great solution for us as a user to be able to own that data. But right now, it's very much platform dependent, and each platform is doing it a little bit different. But I think this is where, folks like us can come together and hopefully shape that future so that, these risks are mitigated and that data is not being, abused.
No, it's a very important subject. Justine, Tara talked a little bit about the adaptation curve. So I'm getting the sense that the metaverse is really going to change the job market over some period of time. The way we work, the way teams work. There's got to be new skills going to be required for success. Just like we're relearning social skills after COVID, it's a bit tiring, but we're relearning what we knew before. So what do you see as some of the changes, new skills required for success in this kind of a very new environment?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Richard. So a couple of thoughts on that. And you're right. I think I'm probably in the same camp as you. I'm still relearning those skills after COVID, right? Slowly but surely. So maybe I'll go here with that question. If I think of all the organizations that we're grappling with, what does a return to work in a hybrid environment look like? We're all trying to recreate, if I may say, that face-to-face interaction, but recognize that people have different schedules. And I think of the metaverse and what it can offer that in terms of that sense of reality or an experience that is very difficult to get in 2D, right? So how does that, and Tara said it really well, right? Before you go out, why don't you figure out internally how you're able to leverage something like this to be able to see how it can really enhance what you do before you bring it out. So I would start something as simple as that, right? So how people that are studying right now to either understand it, see what the potential is, and start to think and practice to the extent that is possible, what would that application be so that you can, within a hybrid environment and working environment, be able to have as close as you do when you're sitting side by side. And then the other piece I would say is if I think of all the organizations from a learning and development point of view, I could see it offering huge opportunities internally again to be able to onboard people from all over the world, give them some scenarios that could be very practical. And Tara was talking in the medical field. I'm thinking on the agriculture perspective. If you think of simulating what the industry needs to go through every year to be able to understand it, to then go out there and interact and give advice to your customers. So there's so many areas, I think, from that perspective that could be used. So the ability of folks to be able to adjust and understand it so that they can really leverage their capability, I think is something to keep at the forefront for all of us, quite frankly.
Yeah, thank you. Tara, what's your take on that? I'm a guy who constantly finds a battle between my printer and my laptop. They don't want to talk to each other. So there's a lot of new skills in areas that we're not familiar with, even as we still struggle with some technology we use every day. So what's your take on new skills? What do we have to start thinking about now, especially for a lot of people who are, graduates and moving into industry now and developing their careers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say like the new skills, if I'm looking at it from a user standpoint, it's essentially a new device, right? Like if I think about, getting a new phone, getting a new laptop, like the first time I got a phone, I had to learn how do I use a phone? How do I interact with different people? How do I navigate it? And I would say the actual user experience in the metaverse today is not the greatest. And that's because we haven't reached mass adoption. And across the different experience, the user experience is different. So for example, I've built virtual worlds. I'm not technical, but like drag and drop, I've built worlds across 3 different platforms to date. And each of those was different, not just building it, but just navigating my actual body in the metaverse, just stepping forward was different across all 3. So I think as we get to mass adoption, and actually in order to get to mass adoption, we do need to have some common standards, right? Like today, if I use my iPhone, there are some common, hand gestures across all. So I maybe, I scroll up, I swipe right, I swipe left. We don't have those standards in the metaverse today. It's very platform agnostic. So I would say just the basic step of learning how to navigate it, that's a hurdle on its own. So when I take my clients through it, we actually have an onboarding experience to teach people how to use their hands. And it's not user-friendly. And ideally, we will have more common standards in the future so that you're not learning a whole new set of skills or movements across every single platform. So I would say user experience can be enhanced a lot here, and it will go a long way. But I would say that's mainly it from a user standpoint. It's just learning, how do I use my hands? How do I use my feet in this, virtual world?
It's an amazing thing to consider. A big part of my career was governance. You're dealing in financial services, so it's very important. So the thing that comes to mind is ethics. And so let's take it another level. I mean, there's got to be ethical considerations. What do companies need to start keeping in mind in terms of the ethical implications of implementing metaverse when you have this kind of immersion and contact in a way that we've never had it before? Justine, what's your take on the ethical considerations here?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Richard. And again, I'll maybe if you allow me, I'll take an example in my industry, right? If you think of whether we had an ability to leverage metaverse to teach, or if you think of another way, if you are primary agriculture and you could actually leverage a metaverse environment to accelerate your learning of what you need to do with your land, right? Like, being a good stewards of it. That data, right, which is kind of in your backyard, is your livelihood, right? So the ability for that metaverse to be able to protect that and give an assurance, I think is critical. So ethically, like how do you keep on collecting information? And the way to create these environments, you need to source yourself back to some original data. And how do you leverage that to teach, but also protect those that are ultimately the owner of the data? Because that could have a huge impact on their livelihood or others that could take that data and then be able to do all sorts of wrongful doings along with it. So I think it's the challenge that it's going to be in front of us is that I guess it already exists, it's already launched, and you would know more than anybody. Once those things take off, if I think of financial institutions or others, right? Often what ends up happening with these players is we'll wait until that ethical environment is set up appropriately before we get in, which could actually delay, what Tara was talking about, which is that acceptance, right, on a more mass basis. But definitely understanding what could be the impact of some of the data sources that you need to collect in order to create the environment, or then in order to continue to offer that learning environment, I think are fundamental.
I'm very encouraged that we have this discussion about ethics starting to occur earlier on than we usually have seen in the past when we've had innovation. We usually tried to fix problems with the ethics considerations at the end. So Tara, how do you see that? What's on your mind when we talk about the ethics of this kind of innovation?
Yeah, so I think Justine made some really great points there around data, privacy, and ownership. And I would say in addition to that, I think about a couple of things around ethics. So one is around user health and safety, right? So if you think about the metaverse, it is an evolution of the internet. And we think about the internet today, there's a lot of online bullying. So for example, people post on social media and you have a bunch of people that are maybe, not saying the nicest things back there. Social media today, I'm reading people's comments, but in the metaverse, you can imagine a world where I have 10 avatars around me, all saying very hateful things, and it feels a lot more real. Sometimes, metaverse experiences are so immersive that you feel like the people are right in front of your face. So if we think about online bullying and harmful behavior and content, there's a potential for it to be a lot more harmful in the metaverse. And to date, we've already seen many articles of people saying like, oh, I was sexually harassed in the metaverse. I was bullied in the metaverse. And I remember when I was first reading those articles about the sexual harassments, it didn't click for me because I'm like, hey, like how could you feel that when you don't physically feel someone touching you in the metaverse today? Of course, that may change in the future with wearables and haptics, but today you don't feel a lot of that touch. But when I went through the Prada experience where I was getting a tour of Italy, it felt real. Like I felt like the avatar was right here. So after going through some of those experiences and reflecting on some of those articles, I can see how this could be, very dangerous in the metaverse. And I have seen already some metaverse platforms add in some security features to, mitigate some of those risks. So for example, in Meta's Horizon World, I have, I can look at my wrist and press a button and it'll take me to a safe space and I can block those users, but just the actual safety of users is a really big one. Bullying could be a lot worse in the metaverse. Then the second ethical thing that I think about is just the digital divide, right? Like when we think about people today, there are people that don't have access to the internet. Maybe they don't have access to hardware. And as we get to mass adoption potentially for the metaverse, a lot of the hardware devices, which you don't always need, but sometimes do for the metaverse, they're quite costly, right? Like today, an Oculus device, not the Pro, but the basic one is about $500. So as we do get more adoption, how do we mitigate this risks of people being left behind, especially when the metaverse might become more of a place where you go to work, not just play, but, work in different opportunities. How do we ensure that we're not leaving a big portion of the population behind?
So it almost starts to seem to me that we have to be mentally and socially prepared, not just technologically prepared for this. And that's going to take some learning. Tara, I want to focus on something you talked about, because you said you developed these digital worlds, across different platforms. So tell me a little bit about the implications that you see for things that on a daily basis we're quite comfortable with. Buying or leasing retail space or homes, urban design, how we get around a city or how we design cities. Tell me a little bit about what you see the metaverse playing a part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because, last year I came across different opportunities in the metaverse where people are becoming like virtual real estate agents, where they're selling virtual property. And at the time I'm like, hey, this is insane, but it's cool because we're seeing new opportunities kind of pop up here. But I'll focus around your question on simulating. So for me, this use case around simulation and design is so valuable within the metaverse. And I've actually, tried some different platforms and demoed some different platforms, but one of them was this platform where you can essentially design your property within the metaverse. So you can, create, let's say at the time, the experience that I demoed, it was a building. So you had this full building here, and in real time, I could use, my hands in the metaverse to build a window. And I was actually able to pull in a map view so I could see, if I designed the window here, the natural sunlight will come through because the positioning of where I'm in within this street. So it becomes very valuable in the sense where you can simulate many different things without actual breaking ground in the physical world. So that can lead to reduced waste, right? Reduced carbon emission. Of course, we have to look at the carbon emission of the technology itself, but there's opportunity here for you to fully design, simulate many different things without actually doing so in the physical world. So that's just, that example that I tested out was looking at this building. How do I design the building? What furniture do I bring in? Where do I put the windows? But globally, people are starting to use metaverse technology to design cities. So Dubai, which is, always quite ahead in terms of technical advancement, they're actually using this concept of the metaverse to design their cities, right? So, where do I put the roads? How do I, design this in a way that I can get most people around in a space? But the really cool thing is when you are designing in the virtual, it's not just leading to potential efficiency reduction in waste, but you can actually bring citizens to this space to get their feedback and co-design. So absolutely, I see this as a really valuable use case for designing cities, properties, many different things. But the real value is you can also do so in a collaborative manner. You can bring all folks together and then give feedback.
Yeah, the collaboration is once it becomes more widely adopted, the collaboration to me seems to be an incredibly social adventure that we haven't had before. In terms of real estate, when drone footage of a property for sale came out, people were amazed to see that. Then they took the camera inside and actually kind of had the camera walk through, let's say, a home or a large property being sold. Is it something that I can actually envision my avatar walking through a property and walking through doors and and going into rooms and going downstairs and literally as if I was walking through a property? Can you see it coming to that?
Absolutely. That is where I see us going. I mean, we kind of have that feature today where you can use your computer and you can look through the different space. But for me to physically feel like I'm going through it, yes, that to me is the future. The limitation or what's going to kind of dictate how long it takes for us to get there is the actual hardware. Today, if I want that real immersiveness where I'm walking down the stairs and I'm opening the door and it feels a lot more real, I would need virtual reality or augmented reality. And we're not there in terms of mass adoption. A year ago, though, from now to a year ago, a lot of the big tech players announced that they were building their own hardware devices. So you have, Sony, Snapchat, whether they're building their own or they're acquiring a company that's building them, there seems to be a bit of a hardware race. Yes, Metaverse in terms of popularity, you don't hear it as much as you did a year ago. And I think that's because generative AI is the hot topic of 2023. But from my understanding, these tech players are all still building out their devices. And as that becomes a lot more adopted, then yes, I think in the future, we will, see ourselves actually viewing properties that way. And it's very valuable in the sense where, if I'm in Mexico right now and a property comes out in Toronto where I live, I don't need to go to Toronto to see it. I just put on my devices and I virtually do that tour.
It's an amazing world. Justine, I want to come back to you because a lot of people who are viewing this now, and certainly who will view the recording of this panel discussion later, are MBA grads or grads from the university in some regard, in some faculty, and they may be interested in pursuing a career relating to the metaverse and its development. And I was wondering, what skills are you thinking of at this early point that might be valuable in this field? Because this is all about adaptation and getting ready for the future.
Yeah, no, great question, Richard. And so maybe I'll answer it not the way you would expect to, but we've today talked about, what's available to us today, right? Tara's given some really good examples. We've talked about the ethics of it, right? We've talked about how do you look at it from an inside perspective as a company and maybe test it yourself first before you go out to the market. And then ultimately it's to go out to the market, right? So when you ask me the question about what skill sets do MBA students need to think about, just think in those different verticals and what skill sets you could bring to apply, right? There's ultimately those programmers that are going to be, I'll say at the heart of that industry in terms of advancing the technology and making it all happen. But as Tara's reminded us many times, we're still in the early adoption phase. And in order for that adoption to accelerate, there's many levers that have to come into play, right? In tandem for it to be successful. So that's what I would say to the audience is that don't look at it necessarily just from that pure technology, but everything that goes around it in order to make it viable and successful. Those are the skill sets, depending on what your area of interest is, you could associate yourself to be able to help overall this technology evolve.
So Justine, just before I go to Tara for her views on that, Tara had mentioned the digital divide, where some places have very poor access to internet, let alone the cost of wearables and devices. Within organizations, we've got employees, and this is going to be a manager's dilemma to some extent. We've got employees who are older and who may be staying in the workforce longer than they had in the past. And so there's also a technological acceptance divide, if you will, if I can use that term. And if I've coined it, then I'll copyright it. But like getting people who, are kind of their job technologically is just to keep up, to make quite a leap. It seems to me that the metaverse is going to seem more real than mechanical. But how do we help an older generation of employees open their minds to this? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's probably the $1 million question, Richard, that you're asking, right? Go back to a few technologies ago, right? Just the iPhone, for example, right? There were some, right? Like, and you look at how we're using it today, myself in an airport doing like a podcast. So exactly, right? Like you kind of go, how did we get to this point where we do seem to be embracing these technologies? I think in a lot of places of work, when you're wanting to put in place a change, and I think technology change, certainly where I am, we realize that the investment you make in the employee experience along the way is your key to the success. So, we've all heard the saying, right? Getting the gadget doesn't cause you to be more effective, more efficient, and so forth. If you don't get that adoption component and really recognize your different stakeholders and give them that support that they need, and I'll say from an employee experience point of view, that's where you have to put your emphasis so that, to Tara's point, we can have a faster adoption. If you don't do that, I think you'll be slow to the market, or you'll be slow to leverage it, and then you always find yourself trying to bring people that are staying behind along with you. So recognizing that, even if you want to then going to go to the market and offer to your customers, if I'm not confident to be able to do it myself, I will never be confident to bring in my customer along with me.
Exactly. Tara, what are your views? MBA skills or career development skills? And also, then I'll ask you the same thing about this technological adaptation divide that may exist inside companies, because we want everyone moving into the future together, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, one thing that I've learned studying business is a lot of times when we think about technology and innovation, you need those strong business people at the table. You need, of course, many different skill sets at the table, but oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this, I come across a new flashy technology and I'm just thinking about how can I apply this? How do we implement this with our clients, within Deloitte itself, et cetera? And oftentimes I have to anchor myself around going back to the problem, going back to the value, not just innovating to innovate, but innovating with purpose. So I would say for all the MBA students, for all the business students, it's really focusing around, what is your area? Do you focus on education? What is your industry? And then going back to the crunchy problems for that industry. So when I raised the point earlier about the pilots, right? Learning how to navigate tough and unsafe scenarios, that's a problem probably within that industry, right? So it's always like going to the problem and thinking about how can a level of immersiveness bring value here, but it always goes back to the problem, to the value. So I would say, being more, having that view of what are some of those challenges of those industries and how might a technology like this be able to bring value is always going to be my advice of anchoring around that. In terms of your second point, that one's a tougher one. And the reason it's a tougher one is it's not just like learning the experience. It's not just the hardware devices, but even myself today, when I put on virtual reality glasses, I get motion sickness, right? So there's so much elements here to try to navigate for us to get to that mass adoption. And it's always going to come down to the user experience. Today, the experience is inconsistent across all different platforms. There's a lot of barriers, the motion sickness, the learning how to navigate your hands, etc. So I would say always anchoring it around how do we make this the best user experience possible. And that's why when we think about the iPhone, it's one of the most popular phones today, and the user experience is consistent, it's easy, etc. So I think we always have to anchor it around those two things. What's the problem we're solving? What's the value we're going after? And also, how do we make that user experience as seamless as possible and a little more consistent across the various experiences, so it's not, relearning what to do every time you access a new one.
So when you're talking about different platforms, Metaverse, we think of Metaverse because Meta really made the big jump into this, but they're not the only competitor now, are they? Tell me a little bit about the landscape you see in terms of competition and what we might see out of this competition, which usually drives greater and faster innovation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great question. And I'll start off by saying when we think about the metaverse, of course, Meta comes to mind, but ideally, there's going to be many, many different players that are playing in this space, building in this space, but there will be a level of interoperability. So if I'm in Meta's experience, hanging out with friends, when I want to go and buy an outfit at the mall, I'm able to just teleport there. It's not this very siloed experience. They seem a bit more connected. In terms of the landscape, there isn't, I would say, a player that is directly at Meta's level in terms of their level of investment and their level of focus within the metaverse. If you asked me, a year ago, who is their competitor, I would say that the leading one would probably be Microsoft. And that's because they had the, what is their platform called? They had Altspace VR, which was similar to Meta's experience where you could go in and you can build in. They were trying to incorporate it in their other Microsoft suite of offerings and tools. They since then have, publicly announced that they're focusing more on generative AI, which we can see with the $10 billion investment they made in OpenAI. So a year ago, I would say that is like their direct competitor, but now Microsoft has kind of shifted their focus to generative AI. Not that they're not doing anything in Metaverse, but they're not invested as much. So I would say I would not put anyone at the status of Meta just because of this really is their top focus, it seems like. But there's a lot of little players, or not little players, smaller players in this space that are also building, and some are building platforms like Meta that you can go into and you can build your own experiences. Some are just focusing on the infrastructure, some are just focusing on the tools, but ideally down the line, all of these different tools and players will kind of contribute to this future metaverse that we envision. I'm not sure, Richard, there may have been a second part to your question, but let me know.
No, my avatar will find that out later, but no, it's fine. Just before we start to open it up for questions, I just want to ask Justine, and then I'll come back to Tara. Any other thoughts that you had about this that maybe we didn't touch on with the questions, or some ending thoughts before we open it up to any questions?
Well, I mean, you've touched on a lot of areas, Richard. What I would probably say is, I think that, first of all, congratulations to bringing the discussion to the table, right? I think that's a great step forward.
Well, this is Kevin and Christine, but thank you for, I'll bask in the reflected honor. So
yeah, but because I think it's a really important topic, and if we go back to some of the previous, as you call, industrial revolutions, right? Like sometimes by the time you wake up and realize it's already there, or it's gone to the next iteration. So early conversation and understanding, I think, was really important. And I do think too, what we have to remember is that it's probably going to be here to stay. How quickly it gets adopted is one thing, but to me, the sooner that we can start to understand it, approaches, as you said, in terms of thinking about it from an ethical point of view, so that it can be as successful as possible, I think is certainly what I would hope people would leave this discussion with today, and that the possibilities in terms of what it could change in our conducting business, education, is second to none. So it'll be a pretty exciting addition to the toolboxes we already have.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think it reinforces our need as citizens to keep pressure on our government officials to stay committed to the expansion of high-speed internet at a minimum, whether it's through line delivery or fiber optic or Starlink, because a part of a country outside of the internet as a part of a country left behind, and it's not fair, especially to our young people. Tara, some of your final comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So completely agree with the points that Justine brought, especially like the 2 points around it's not an if, it's a when. And also it's important that we bring in a lot of the discussions around the ethics, the standards, up front. The other two that I kind of want to leave us with is oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this too, is I focus so much on the technology. So like blockchain, digital assets, VR, AR, et cetera. And we're getting into an era where there's so much convergence in the technology. So it's never just like, hey, I want to create a metaverse. It's what is the business value? What are we trying to do? So for example, Telfer wants to create this virtual learning environment that people can come together and collaborate and learn and et cetera. That is the subject. We're enhancing learning. We're, looking for some sort of value. And in just that experience, you have the concept of the metaverse where you have a much more immersive virtual learning space. You have the concept of blockchain and digital assets where it's, hey, whatever course, whatever certificate I get is actually an NFT so that when I go on LinkedIn, I can actually prove that I did this course. And then generative AI is there to be my virtual teaching assistant to help me build the 3D models. So just in this one use case, this one example, there's 3 different immersive technologies that are at play, and there's so much more under the hood, but these are just, in this brief example. So I would say tech is second, the business value, the driver, the opportunity is first. And once you've designed or defined what you actually want to achieve, then many different technologies need to come together to bring that experience to life. So biggest, thought for MBA students is any technical advancement, any innovation needs strong business people to make sure that you're defining the objectives, you're reaching those objectives, and then the technology comes together. And it's never going to be one tech. Many technologies are going to come together to bring that experience to life.
Well, you're right. I don't want to simplify it in any way, but it seems to be that it's a tool, right? And it's how you're going to use this tool. And rather than just jump on it, like jump into the lake and starting to learn to swim, maybe you want to take a couple lessons before you jump off the dock, And this might signal a period of like an approach that may be a little different. The internet came on us and we swam through it and tried to figure out how we want to use it over time. But maybe now a little bit smarter, we have a chance to determine it. So just before I open up questions, Tara, Justine, cannot thank you enough for sharing your insights. Wonderful answers. But your answers, the more answers you give, the more questions we come up with. So we'll stop there for now, and we'll open it up with Christine and Kevin's help to open it up to any questions that we may have.
Yes, we already have a few questions in the chat. So let's start with the first one. Generative AI is at the forefront of metaverse development, but do you believe it will reduce non-virtual barrier for using the metaverse? Example, expensive technology, motion sickness is so hot. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. So I think that generative AI will reduce the barriers in the actual development of these experiences, and also it might enhance the experiences. But the examples that you gave there around the expensive technology and the motion sickness, I don't think generative AI is going to be the primary driver behind those. So I think expensive technology is more like the more competition we have, the more advances we see there, that may then reduce the cost there. And the motion sickness, I don't know the answer of exactly how we solve this, but I know in terms of different platforms, I found that my motion sickness is worse in some and none in others. So generative AI will have a really key role to play in metaverse and AI more broadly, but I don't think that it'll really help some of the examples that you provided there.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Next question. What roles or opportunities do you see for government in the metaverse? I'm thinking of virtual embassies, virtual tourism on Earth or other planets, or education. But what about the day-to-day services? Example, passport renewal, employment services, construction, etc.
So maybe I could take that one to kick us off. Oh. Sorry about that. Maybe Tara, do you want to kick it off, and then once the announcement's done?
Absolutely. So I would say globally, just looking at adoption, I've already seen either governments roll it out or talk about rolling it out. So Barbados was actually the first country that announced that they would be creating a virtual embassy. Their rationale behind that was it was just very hard to maintain that type of expense of having embassies all around the world. So that's one example. I don't think they've actually rolled it out yet, but they announced to. I believe it was Sweden, which was another country that created a virtual headquarters for folks to go and get support around their taxes. So yes, absolutely. I've already seen adoption globally for governments that are trying to use this as a new channel to be able to service citizens. The one thing that I would always challenge us to think about is, what is the additional value? Like if I can go to a website and call someone to get that help, what is different in the metaverse, right? In some countries, the difference or the value that they, outline for this need is in the metaverse, I can actually verify that it's Terra. So I can actually be able to transfer the ownership of a, deed or stuff like that. So yes, absolutely. I would say different countries have already started rolling this out. Some are for, we're doing passports, some are for, advisory services. So I think this will be the future. It's just a matter of, what is the value? How do you handle the accessibility stuff? It is important just to ask ourselves for every use case and that we consider here.
And maybe I'll add just this. I was thinking of the passport piece. Think of new immigrants coming to a country, right? And they're like, if you're able with the metaverse, like you talk about the value add, Tara, but if you were able to show them how to do something, but the metaverse allowed you to do it in their language so they could also practice it, all of a sudden it could really help, right? In terms of making what could be a traumatic experience really successful. So I love what you say about think of the value add first before you say, oh, I'll jump to this technology because it's going to solve all my problems.
Very much so. Christine, do you see that question about a university?
No, I don't.
Okay, one of the questions is there an opportunity for a physical traditional university to set up a virtual university in the metaverse that would bring a new experience, but merge classes for them to take? Now we talk about virtual, it just means someone who's on Teams and calling in, but it goes back to what Justine and Tara were talking about. Is this a new era that we're heralding in, perhaps, in the way we teach?
So I can kick it off. I think it's a fascinating question, Richard, because so if I put myself in the shoes of a business school, for example, and think of the topic we just had, and imagine a faculty of business being able to have like a virtual setting like that, like a metaverse, where students could come together, that could actually be the practical side of them getting ready for the workforce. I have to say, for me, that makes a lot of sense. Should it kind of totally change how we teach at the university level for everything that we do? I'd say probably a bit too early for that, because I think there are some elements that you want to preserve. But you asked earlier about what the skill sets are. What better place before you go to the workforce to be able to practice it from a university perspective? I think it's something that would be worthwhile thinking of as a component, or as you said earlier, as one of the tools, right? To kind of graduate from with your toolkit.
Yeah, very much so. Tara.
Yeah, completely agree with what Justine mentioned. And I would always say there's always value in thinking about, what would that look like today versus what would that look like 5 years from now? And what could that look like 10 years from now? So if I think about, Telfer School of Management having a headquarters in the metaverse, I think there's a lot of value there for people to go and collaborate, for people to go and practice their presentation skills, etc. And in the future, I see this being another toolkit to your virtual learning where folks can go and, take classes, practice skills, etc. Today, if I were to do it, it might be, there's various devices in the Telfer building that you can go access and go to the metaverse. But for me as a student to just go to a Telfer metaverse today, there is that barrier due to the hardware, right? And I want to clarify that you don't need these hardware devices to access a metaverse environment. It's a spectrum of immersiveness. So a lot of people who maybe have kids, you might have kids that play Fortnite and Roblox. A lot of people, think of that as the metaverse because you have that spatial audio. You're able to connect with people. For me as a user, if I'm going to access a learning environment that's like Roblox and I'm, using my keyboard to navigate, I, as an individual, I wouldn't get that much value from that, right? But that's going to be the most accessible today where people don't have some of those devices. So I would say there's a version of what that might look like today. And I think there could be some value there. And as we get more mass adoption, as hardware is more accessible, as it is more user-friendly, absolutely. I think it would be really cool and valuable to have this for, every university to bring virtual learning to, a completely different level than what we're used to today.
So those are great insights. And we know that large companies, very large corporations, have incredible financial resources to be working on this in terms of training and development. But one of the questions that just came up is, how can small or medium-sized businesses just start to prepare for this? Like when they don't have a ton of money, but don't want to be left out of the starting gate when everyone's starting to learn about this. Justine, thoughts about small companies and what they can do?
Yeah, so this is where I guess the word that comes to mind, Richard, is probably partnership, right? Like, so I'll give a parallel example, right? In terms of small businesses being able to access very practical and applied research, colleges offer that and do it quite well, right? Where you can come and see them, present a problem within 2 or 3 months, they can come back to you in a very practical way, help you solve that could be monetized or solved depending on what the problem you're bringing to the table. So I think it would be a really neat way for small businesses to see how they could partner. I'm thinking, if you look at the evolution of office spaces, right, where smaller businesses now go and rent an office space for a period of time, could that be too how that applies so that smaller businesses will be able to access it versus the big bang approach, as you say, from the large corporates? Just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah. Sarah.
Yeah, completely agree with that. The other thing I would say is when organizations are considering getting into the metaverse, that could look like many different things, right? Like if I'm a large enterprise and I want to build out a headquarters, that's a huge investment. That's going to take some time. But the alternative to that, there's already a lot of existing platforms. So it's a monthly subscription to access this catalog of immersing learning modules that are applicable to any enterprise. So that could be leadership skills, how to remove unconscious bias, etc. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to go build this experience. I'm going to go build this world. But it's, again, what is the value you're looking for? What is that strategic focus? So if it's enhancing learning, what are those modules or platforms that exist today? And that could be, off the shelf type of immersive learning modules. The other alternative is there's also relatively cheap subscription model type platforms that are drag and drop. You essentially go and drag and drop and add certain scripts to build your own custom learning platform. So I think there's a whole spectrum of how to get involved from, partnering with the big organizations, accessing, platforms that you pay on a monthly basis. So it's that level of investment can be quite minimal to millions of dollars if you want to build a bespoke, headquarter.
Interesting. So there's many interesting questions, which just shows that both of you just generated interest from our listeners. So I'm going to end just in order to ensure that we respect everyone's time on the published calendar. Last question for both, whether you're big or whether you're little, top 3 industries or top 2 industries that you think are going to either be entering the metaverse first or maybe impacted and pulled into the metaverse first. Who do you think what industries or sectors do you think are probably more prone to this than not? Let's start with Tara and we'll end with Justine.
It's a great question, Richard. And I'm just like thinking.
I wish I thought of it. Someone else did.
So I would say where I've seen the most adoption to date is probably in the consumer industry. So a lot of And let me take that back, actually. So I think first it depends on the use case. So if I think about learning, where I've seen the most adoption to date has been a lot of it in the government and public sector. So going to that example of like the military learning, the security, all of those type of use cases, I've seen a lot in government. Now, if I think about actually so the more externally facing use cases, so how do you actually interact with your customers? I've seen more adoption in the consumer industry. So they've created a bunch of different immersive experiences where they showcase their products and stuff. So it's hard to say these are the top industries. It's what use case and then where's that adoption? So I would say it really depends, but to date where I've seen the most is government, consumer, and the third one, I would just be pulling an industry out of nowhere. I don't know. but I would say real estate too, real estate development.
Yeah.
So I've seen that quite a bit too, but it really depends on the use case.
Yeah. And Justine, you're in the enviable position. You
Oof.
get the last word. So what do you
Yeah,
see?
no.
Who's going to get pulled in first?
Well, I mean, I was going to ask Tara, put the question back to her, because I mean, a lot of it started in the gaming industry as well, right? So obviously
Yes.
that's going to continue. You know, and in terms of others that I could see could have a huge application, I'm thinking medical. You know, in terms of being able to teach, I would be remiss if I didn't say in the industry where I am in ag, with all the challenges we've got, if the metaverse can actually help us simulate to better solve these problems, I could see huge application, right? But education, gaming, consumer, I think were all the ones that come to mind for me, certainly.
Well, thank you both. I mean, you've just been a delight and you saved me because I can come up with some of the questions, but I do not have the answers. So I'm going to take everyone off the hook now and turn it back to Christine so that she can wrap this up for everyone. Christine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, Tara, and Justin today for sharing your expertise and insight with us. What an insightful and very interesting event today. We thank you for taking us on the journey to the fascinating world of Metaverse and its potential impact on organization. Tara, Justin, and Richard, I will be in touch with you after the event. We have a special gift for you thank you for being here today and taking time in your busy schedule. I know two of you were traveling today, so your presence was very, very appreciated today. So I also want to thank the audience for participating today. We have recorded the event. It will be posted on the social media of the MBA Alumni Association. So I hope you enjoyed the event today. And I just want to thank my colleagues from the MBA AA that helped me today, Win, Kevin, and Mark. So thank you very much for your valuable assistance in coordinating the event. If you're interested in joining the MBA AA, either as a member of the board or just to support us or volunteer, please do not hesitate to contact us. We're always looking for new members. So once again, thank you very much to our guest speaker, and we're looking forward to see you at our next event. Thank you.